Good evening. As you will have noticed, I am not Dua Lipa, who I'm pleased to say will be joining us very shortly. I'm Ted Hodgkinson, Head of Literature and Spoken Word here at the South Bank Centre, and it is a thrill to welcome you to the Queen Elizabeth Hall for a truly landmark occasion, the 10th anniversary of the International Booker Prize in its current form. For anyone who thrives on great fiction and storytelling, this decade has been transformative. When the prize was reimagined 10 years ago to celebrate a single book and its translation, it did more than just hand out a trophy. It fundamentally reshaped the literary and cultural landscape. It recognized translation not as a secondary linguistic delivery service, but as an equal and essential part of a creative collaboration. In doing so, it has opened imaginative byways into new geographies and lives, from the streets of Seoul to the rural heartlands of Oman, that might have otherwise remained closed to us. At the South Bank Centre, we've watched this transformation firsthand. We are seeing a demographic shift that is hugely exhilarating. A new generation of readers who see no borders on their bookshelves. For these readers, many of whom are here tonight, translation isn't a barrier, it's an invitation to broaden our horizons and step out of our comfort zones. We've seen that energy every time we've hosted former winners of this prize on our stages, from Kang to Olga Tokarczuk. Now, as a former chair of the judges back in 2020, I have a very visceral memory of what the experience looks like from the inside. I remember being featured in a piece in the Daily Mail at the time, the photograph looking, I have to say, slightly shell-shocked beside a tower of books as it fell on top of me. I think the headline was "Tall Order," and it wasn't an exaggeration. I was nearly consumed by a collapsing stack of books. But beyond excavating myself from a mountain of reading, what stayed with me most was the profound sense of connection. To judge this prize is to be bonded in a unique way with your fellow judges. That shared journey of traversing the globe through its most urgent voices together is at the heart of what makes this prize so special. To take us through the story of this decade and the many dimensions of this extraordinary prize, we are joined tonight by two people who embody the prize's purpose and its future. First, a dear friend and colleague whose leadership has been vital to the prize's flourishing, alongside the English Language Booker Prize and the recently announced Children's Booker. Gabby Wood is a former literary editor and a tireless advocate for an immense international community of writers and translators. Following her, we are delighted to welcome Dua Lipa. As a global superstar and a voracious reader, she has used her platform to champion international voices through her Service95 Book Club, and we are especially proud to have her as the curator of our London Literature Festival in this, our 75th anniversary year. To start us off, please welcome the Chief Executive of the Booker Prize Foundation, Gabby Wood.
Thank you, Ted. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the International Booker Prize. I will be your guide this evening. And I promise not to say much now because there are far more exciting people who are about to take the stage. But I would like to set the scene briefly. We're calling this the 10th anniversary because 10 years ago, the prize went from rewarding a body of work to rewarding a single book, and specifically a book translated into English from another language. It became unique in splitting the prize equally between author and translator, and it went on to become, I hope you won't mind my saying this, the world's most influential prize for translated fiction. Over the past, thank you, not my doing. Over the past 10 years, 5 International Booker Prize winners or nominees have gone on to win the Nobel Prize for their body of work. A book that exists in English often travels further than it did in its original language. Whether or not that's a good thing may crop up later. but International Booker Prize winners have been translated into dozens of other languages as a result. And there's also a sort of boomerang effect in the author's home country. The winning books become bestsellers overnight in their original editions. Authors are welcomed home as if they were Olympic athletes. Here in the UK, we've started to notice certain things over the past decade. Sales of translated fiction have increased by 31%. The number of publishers submitting books for the prize has grown by 27%, and 2/3 of all of those publishers are independents. Whereas in 2016, most translated fiction, this is anecdotal by the way, came from the same few European languages. Now there's a huge range from several continents, and the most popular language translated into English is Japanese. Over half of all translated fiction in the UK is bought by people under the age of 35, who are more ethnically diverse than buyers of general fiction and more likely to buy books in an independent bookshop. So I am taking the liberty of saying that this is the future. Tonight, we'd like to take you on a whistle-stop tour behind the scenes. You'll be hearing from readers, writers, translators, publishers, agents, judges, some of whom have travelled many miles to be here. And we'll show you a snapshot of this year's 6 shortlist films, filmed here at the South Bank, so you can start placing your bets on the 11th winner. Before we do that, I'd like to thank the people who make this possible. On a micro level, my superb colleagues at the Booker Prize Foundation and Premiere. On a macro level, the entire translated fiction ecosystem, as you'll see it represented here tonight. I'd like to thank the South Bank for hosting us. And there are particular people who have, in different ways, made significant contributions to the life of this prize. Its Emeritus Director, Fiammetta Rocco, the Booker Prize Foundation's long-standing funder, Crankstart, and the new funder of this prize, Buchmann Philanthropies, who are also supporting the London Literature Festival here at the South Bank this autumn. Heartfelt thanks to all. Now, here to speak to you first is an impassioned reader, a great friend of the Booker Prizes. She has featured many of these books in her Service95 Book Club. She's been the keynote speaker at one of our ceremonies. She has starred in one of our short films. We all adore her. And I have total faith in her literary sensibility and commitment. Please welcome the brilliant, bilingual, global superstar, Dua Lipa.
Wow. Thank you, Gabby. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I feel so honored to join you all tonight, sharing a platform with writers, translators, and judges who I admire so much. And of course, with you, my fellow readers, thank you for having me. While I've always felt firmly rooted, my life has never really been what you might call local. I was born in the UK, but my first language was Albanian. Woo! London is my home, but I'm often on the road. And today I have the privilege of traveling the world doing a job that I love. Last year, I played live in 33 cities in 20 countries and sang in 9 different languages. It turns out, thank you. It turns out my reading habits follow a similar pattern. Since we launched the Service95 Book Club 3 years ago, 8 of my 33 monthly reads have been translated fiction. Just as importantly, these 33 books tell stories that span Japan, Korea, Nigeria, Colombia, the US, Mexico, Hungary, Norway, Afghanistan, Poland, Ireland, Spain, the UK, France, Vietnam, and Australia. I read as much as time allows, and while some of the books I love become book club titles, others remain private passions. I'm a reader who loves to be immersed in a novel, and I mean really deeply in it. When I read translated fiction, and some of you will recognize these scenes, I walk the streets of Naples in the shoes of a young girl who's becoming aware that her future will be defined by her gender. I've borne witness to animals taking revenge on their hunters in rural Poland, or did they? I've gained wisdom I didn't know I needed from a pigeon on a balcony in Mexico City, And as Guadalupe Natal writes, you can't get anything past a pigeon. I've overheard a conversation between French rescue responders who decided not to send help to 30 drowning asylum seekers who believed they would find sanctuary on British soil. I felt the pain of a particularly lonely love in Czechoslovakia. I've suffered heartbreak in 1960s Tokyo. I've even seen my life flash before my eyes as I faced a firing squad in Colombia. Just this year, I've met sworn virgins in Albania. I thought I knew everything about Albania. But it took a Bulgarian writer, a Bulgarian translator, a small British independent publisher, and an international prize for me to find this story. There really isn't anything quite like a book to understand the perspective of others, and translated fiction takes that even further. I guess it's the fusion of an experience that's so universal and at the same time so unique. It's the antidote to othering. When I launched my book club, it wasn't in a cozy cafe in London. It was with a reading group in Downview Women's Prison. I was there with Gabby as part of the Books Unlocked program. Each year, the Booker Prize Foundation provides free Booker-nominated books to UK prisons and young offender institutions, and that also includes titles from the international list. One of the most insightful conversations about a book I've ever had was that morning in Downview. And I'll never forget what one of the women shared with the group, that perhaps that if she'd read more books when she was younger, maybe she wouldn't be here now. That moment really brought it home to me that reading a book is often so much more than a solitary activity. It can trigger a conversation with a friend, or, like in Downview, provide a way to share a profound experience with a wider group. And a book club discussion is maybe the one occasion where you get even more out of it if you disagree. Last year's winner of the International Booker Prize was Heart Lamp, written by Banu Mushtaq and translated by Deepa Bhasthi. We'll have the pleasure of hearing from Deepa shortly. In her acceptance speech, Banu said, "This book was born from the belief that no story is ever small, that in the tapestry of human experience, every thread holds the weight of the whole." As a reader, I want to follow those threads of connection. What a joy it is to read. What a joy to read the world. Thank you to the International Booker Prize for giving us this gift.
Thank you, Dua. No story is ever small. Brilliant. As Dua says, you're about to meet one of last year's winners, Deepa Bhasthi, who translated Heart Lamp, a blazing collection of stories about Muslim women fighting against oppression in southern India. Banu Mushtaq wrote these stories over a 33-year period, and Deepa curated them to form a new collection, which she then translated. It was groundbreaking. Largely written in a form of Kannada, more common in everyday speech than in literature, the stories are also woven through with Urdu and Arabic words, where the characters naturally slip those into their speech, all of which Deepa found a way to translate into English. Since winning the International Booker Prize, Heart Lamp has been translated into 30 other languages. Deepa will be speaking tonight to Daniel Hahn, International Booker-nominated translator from Portuguese, Spanish, and French. Daniel has also judged the prize. He's one of the founders of SALT, a project for South Asian literature in translation. And he's the author of 2 books on the art of translation, the latest of which is just out, If This Be Magic, The Unlikely Art of Shakespeare in Translation. Please welcome Deepa and Danny to the stage.
Good evening. I like our entrance music. That's nice. I want that everywhere I go.
Do a little dance.
Nice attitude. Good evening, everyone. It's really lovely to be here, and to be here with Deepa. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Danny.
We met just after you won the Booker International last year, and I will at some point in our conversation ask you to say something about what this weird year has been like now that you're about to cede the crown or sash or whatever it is to some other, I was going to say unsuspecting, maybe entirely suspecting, very hopeful translator. But maybe I thought we could start our conversation not about that, but talking about reading translations, just thinking about some of the things Stuart was saying about being a reader of these books. Were you, did you grow up reading translations? Were the books that made you, because translators, we're writers, obviously, but we're readers first, like most writers are.
Right.
Did you read stuff in translation? Is that how it started?
Yes, absolutely. I think translation, the idea of translation is so ingrained in the experience of living in India because we are so multilingual that the minute we get out of our house, we are automatically translating. When I went to school, I studied in an all English medium education right from kindergarten, whereas I spoke Kannada at home, 2 different versions of Kannada. So I'm automatically translating my experiences from Kannada into English and the other way around when I came back home from school and spoke to my mother about what happened that day. So I think it's just so ingrained. And it so happened that I read a lot of Russian literature growing up because in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, in what was the former USSR, they flooded the country with a lot of books from, Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and all the, and my grandfather had collected a lot of these books, possibly because they were very, very cheap and very, very easily accessible, even in the tiny little town that I was born and raised in. And it took me, I think, until I was in my 20s to realize that these were actually books in translation. So because I read so much and we didn't have a bookstore in my town, I think I read Gorky when I was 10. Obviously didn't understand a word, but that was not the point. It was just words on a page which I wanted to read. And it must have been, so translations are very, very, very accessible in India. And it must have been, was it similar? Did you have a similar experience?
It was similar for me. I was reading Asterix when you were reading Tolstoy.
Yeah, so did I.
Yeah. Obviously Tolstoy later. But mostly Asterix. And I noticed we were coming, literally have a Moomin notebook that I'm reading from. I was reading, when I was a child, I was reading a lot of work in translation and completely oblivious to this.
Yes.
I grew up monolingual, but I grew up surrounded by other languages. My mother was from Brazil, my father from Argentina, so I always had languages around me. But I'm interested that you said, despite the fact that you were kind of translating all the time and moving between languages, that you somehow weren't aware of the fact that Dostoevsky was not writing in Kannada or Tolstoy was not writing in English, that you somehow, that bit of it was absent. And I wonder whether that says anything about the way translation is or isn't valued in India. I mean, I suppose this has probably changed, but how much has that changed, that sense that people talk about translation, people are aware of it, not just it's part of everyday life, but actually there's a conversation about it, about how this bit of Tolstoy ended up being available, or Asterix, ended up being available to someone who can't read 19th century Russian.
Right, I think, so there's a very vibrant culture of what we call bhasha to bhasha translations, which is one Indian language into the other.
Yeah.
So there's a long history of that. I think the idea of multilinguality is so ingrained in our experiences of culture, whether it is in literature, whether it is in just everyday life, that the idea that something is a translation doesn't really strike. And I think a lot of it is also to do with the fact that for the longest time ever, the translator was never named. It was never seen as a translator's work also. Where the translator is also the writer of a book, of the book in translation in a certain way. So I think that's, and since these are changes I've seen over the last 1 year, that there is a much more engaged conversation about how translations work and why one translation might not work over the other, or all these, which has been incredible to see. And these are not, and this is not even on panels or on literary festivals. These are everyday people talking about, oh, this is what translation is, or this is how this is important. So I think the conversation has changed quite a lot, and I really hope that that continues to be discussed amongst readers. Yeah.
You said something that I want to come back to in a second, but I wonder if you can say something about Kannada particularly as a language and as a literature, as distinct from, but you said there's been a long time of and a large amount of translation between Indian languages. But the sense I get from sort of the outside is that there is a kind of hierarchy, that the neighboring languages, you have Tamil, you have Malayalam, which are much more widely translated to other Indian languages, I think, as well as outbound, as it were. Is that right?
Yes, so Kannada is, it's not minor in the number of speakers that it has. It has, I think, roughly around 65 million people who are native speakers of the language, which is a huge number. But compared to what you mentioned, Tamil or even Hindi, Urdu, Malayalam, there are very few books that get translated from Kannada into English. And I'm aware that we're not talking about Kannada to other Indian language translations, which are far higher in number. But the ones into English are very limited. And hopefully that will change. Hopefully, since the International Book Award that Heart Lamp won, there has been a greater interest in thinking about what Kannada literature is, or who are the other ones that more people should be reading. So this hierarchy, I don't know what the reasons are. Is the hierarchy there because not as many books were translated from the language? Obviously, it doesn't mean that Kannada doesn't have extraordinary literature, whether contemporary or slightly older. So I don't know where the hierarchy, as artificial as it is, was constructed.
I'm curious about the way in which, if things are changing, what the particular Booker effect is. Gabby was talking at the beginning about the effect on the number of translations published in this country and the number of readers, and it's really easy to see, I think, as a translator myself, what the impact has been of the prize here. But I'm really interested in the impact it has in all the other countries, often the countries where the writers come from. When I've had books nominated for the Booker by writers from Angola or from Brazil, say, it does kind of change the conversation, not
Absolutely.
just here.
Yeah.
And I'm interested partly because there is a kind of odd post-colonial dimension to this idea that there is validation that's like coming from London, and this somehow changes the conversation in India. And I feel that that's interesting and also uncomfortable, maybe. There's something about that.
Deeply problematic, of course.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's like, it's almost like a double-edged sword, right? It's like it's been amazing over the last year to see Kannada being mentioned on panels, which was never the case. Every time people were talking about translations from India or even within the languages, Kannada was never mentioned. This is just one example. But at the same time, I'm very aware of the fact that this comes from London, from the former colonizer. And so these are difficult conversations that, so the way I probably would want to see it is in recognizing that there is a difference in the English that is spoken here and written here, and Indian English is different, and the English that was that I used to translate Heart Lamp is very different from how it is spoken. So that's one way of saying that yes, we have this troubling history that we need to reckon with, and so on. But also, this is one of the ways we're dealing with that, decolonizing the language, the English language, and recognizing that it is as much an Indian language now, the way we use it in the country. So I think that's one of the ways I would prefer to pay attention to it, because it is problematic. And where does one dismantle the whole narrative, and how does one think about it otherwise?
There's a thing, I've written down something, I'm going to quote you at yourself, if you don't mind. Deepa wrote a really interesting article in Wasafiri magazine couple of months back, and you say, I think this relates to what you're describing. I'm just going to quote this, if you don't mind. In my practice as a translator, it is more important to drag the English language towards myself and my identity as a person living in Canada than to attempt to strip my language of its idiosyncrasies and force-fit it into the rules of English grammar. That feels like a very good description of how you can tackle this sense of the complication of the language. But I wonder if it also relates to some idea possibly of who you're translating for. Mm-hmm. It's not a thing that we always talk about or think about, and it's not necessarily a question to which there's a useful answer, but it's quite an interesting question. And it's certainly the case that when I'm translating from Portuguese into English, say, I on the whole am not going to be translating for people in Brazil.
Right.
I'm not going to be translating for a readership that is necessarily culturally familiar or that is kind of geographically close to the writer. But if you're working between a pair of languages which cohabit mm-hmm. in the place where the writer is and where you are, you must have a sense of a readership that is not just, of course, it's us here and we're very grateful, right? And it's great, the book is great, read Heartlamp, very good. Yeah. But also like you have a sense of there being a readership that is also near you, a readership that is in India, that is diasporic,
right.
as well as all of the rest of us. Yeah. How much, was there a point at which you start thinking about that when you're translating, or is that kind of?
Not until much later, not until probably the edits were happening. Because for me, I was very clear that I wanted to work on two different levels. One was to make sure that I didn't want to use words which were pan-Indian, which is a term I have a lot of problems with. Mm-hmm. Because if you all know anything about India, each state is almost like a different country because we are so different. And to say that the name of, for example, the name of a dish is known as the same, has the same name all over the country is ridiculous. It doesn't. So one example that I always reach for is roti, which is flatbread. To make, I would never translate it as flatbread. So, I think
you're pandering now.
I am. Translating food should be criminalized, if you ask me.
Okay.
So roti is how we say it in most of South India, whereas up in the north it is roti. I think that's what people here would also be a lot more familiar with. So that's R-O-T-I. Whereas that's not the word we use in the south. Or things like sari, we say sire. And this end of the sire is called seragu. It's not pallu. Pallu is a very Punjabi, Delhi, so North Indian, Northwest Indian, those. So I was very clear that I didn't want to use these words just because the editors in India are based in Delhi and that's the word they're familiar with. That was one part of the way I was thinking about it. And the second one was I didn't see why I had to dilute my understanding of both English and Kannada culture to make it easy for a non-Indian reader. Mm. This idea that literature has to be easy and accessible, I think I squarely blame the internet and Google for it, because we're always Googling any word that we don't understand. But when I was reading as a child, and I'm sure that was a similar experience for you, there would be words which I didn't know the meanings of. And it was fine. It didn't really stop me from reading it just because I didn't understand one particular word or one particular phrase or part of the culture. So that's something I wanted to kind of bring back. And so in one of the stories, when I say khatna, there is which is circumcision. It is explained. The reader just has to stay with the story and read past the first few lines and say, okay, this is what it means, instead of saying khatna dash circumcision or footnote or, So those are...
And trust you. I mean, I don't know how much of this is also a confidence thing. I find that I'm increasingly, because I've now been translating for 20 years, I'm increasingly bold about those things. Mm. And I now, more often than not, will get suggestions from a publisher who will say, our readers won't know what this means. And I now go, that's all right.
That's all right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. They'll be
and
fine.
they'll learn.
Like I'm always encountering things I don't know in English and any other
exactly.
language, and that is how they learn. That's also
Exactly.
that's also how the language expands.
Yeah.
It's also how the language gets kind of stretched.
And also, isn't that why we read literature in the first place? To encounter something that we don't know and to learn something from it.
Yeah.
If we just needed somebody to summarize it, we wouldn't pick up a book, So you would just do what, AI, summarize it and get the gist of the story. But that's not what we do. That's not why we read literature. So,
is that the sort of conversation that is kind of enabled by the book, like the platform you have? Because you've had this extraordinary year, and on the one hand, you do festivals and you're very famous and people think you're wonderful and it's all great, and that's very nice and congratulations, it's nice being.
Thank you.
But on the other hand, there must be a substantial thing that you get from it, which is not just another party, another festival. That actually there is a kind of sophistication of a conversation that you're invited to shape now. Maybe now that we're nearly 12 months away from it, that a bit of the sort of champagne thing is over, and actually there is a kind of enabled conversation that is really sophisticated and quite nuanced about translation, particularly in the context in which you're working, but also more generally. Do you recognize that as a change?
Absolutely. I think the first few months were all about felicitations and champagne and parties and literature festivals, which is all great.
Unbearable.
Unbearable. Yes. Oof. To be famous is so bad.
all those of us who, to be clear, have not won the International Booker, we feel so sorry for you this year.
Sorry. But it's been, obviously that's great, and so this was the first time an Indian translator had won the International Booker, and so it's been wonderful, that apart. But somewhere along the line, along the way, the idea of translation itself kind of got lost, because no one was talking about the book anymore. It's like you're invited to inaugurate a block party, or I have, by the way. I've said no to it. So you get all these
You think, this is what I became a literary translator for?
Absolutely.
Finally.
Finally.
So weird.
But I think over the last few months, the conversation has changed very visibly, and which I'm very, very happy about. So people are talking about, okay, so what is it about translation that we need to be thinking about, and should we be a little more bolder about these things? And that's something that a lot of younger translators have been thinking about and reaching out to me for, so which has been great.
I wonder if you feel like that is, I mean, it's going to sound like a weird question, but if you feel that is kind of also part of your job, like as a translator, your job is to translate, but also you're being an advocate for translation. As Gabby mentioned in the introduction, I was fortunate enough to be a judge on the International Booker in 2017, and I was doing this kind of as a translator. We're here on stage, sort of representing somehow, and I feel like there's part of it is the judging.
Yeah.
Oh, it was amazing. It was. I mean, I kind of don't know how to describe it. It was just so much fun. We read, we had 127 books, I believe. Wow. I say I believe, as though I didn't know exactly. It is exactly 127 books.
Did you read all of them?
We read all of them.
Okay.
But it's a really weird kind of reading, actually. And it changed a lot of my assumptions about reading and about literature and about translation. Partly because you're reading, first of all, you're reading like a book a day, and I'm not a very fast reader, so this is like all I did for most of those months. But also you're reading in company, which is an odd thing.
Right. Yeah.
Which I think I thought to begin with meant, like, you read a book and you come in and you have to then persuade people of your opinion. And increasingly it felt like something different was happening. That what I was benefiting from was having my mind changed quite a lot.
Right.
I was on a judging panel. It was chaired by Nick Barley, and I was on with Chico Inigwe and Elif Shafak and Helen Maud. And a lot of the time, the experience was listening to people talking about these things and going, what is it that Chico has noticed that I haven't noticed? And so it's a very humbling way of reading, but it felt like, as I was saying, part of what we have to do as a translator. Part of the job is, as when you were doing Heartlamp, you were also pitching it. You were assembling the collection, and being here and being enthusiastic with lovely people who are there in the dark. Hello. I feel like this is part of the job too, getting to enthuse.
Yeah.
with
So
very
in fact,
enthusiastic-
on some days, one feels that the actual typing out the translation is the easy bit.
Oh, and who has time?
That's just that gets
Yeah.
over quickly.
Yeah.
It's the other things that.
So
one
thank you for
does.
keeping us away from our translation.
Yes.
This is
Thank you.
infinitely more fun. And thank you for being here. So nice to have you here.
Thank you, Danny.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deepa and Danny. That's the first time I've seen Asterix and Tolstoy on the same shelf, and I'm delighted. So, from one former judge to another, Olivette Otele judged the prize in 2021. The winning book that year was At Night All Blood is Black, written by David Diop and translated from French by Anna Moskovakis. David and Olivette are here this evening, and I will just tell you a little bit about them before I invite them to the stage. David is a professor of 18th century French literature. He was born in France and raised in Senegal. At Night All Blood is Black is a story about Senegalese soldiers who fought for France during the First World War. Olivette is a historian, currently distinguished research professor of the legacies and memory of slavery at SOAS in London. She is the author of 3 books, including African Europeans, An Untold Story. Among other things, David and Olivette will be speaking this evening about underrepresented voices. They will be speaking in French, and in a feat of live translation, they'll be subtitled on the screen behind me. The interpreter, Karine Kennedy, is sitting right up there in the booth next to the South Bank speech-to-text transcriber, Nicola Dutton. I've seen this done before, and it is fairly miraculous. So, please welcome to the stage, David Diop and Olivette Otele.
Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Bienvenue ce soir. Nous sommes absolument ravis, David et moi, de pouvoir partager ces moments avec vous. Et sans plus attendre, nous allons commencer notre conversation. Alors David, toi et moi, nous avons des choses en commun, mais en particulier notre amour pour la littérature, mais aussi notre intérêt pour l'histoire des empires coloniaux européens, notamment français essentiellement pour toi, et britannique pour moi. J'avais quelques questions par rapport à ça. Quel lien fais-tu entre l'Empire et la littérature? Et pour être plus précise, comment la littérature a pu faire émerger des voix qui ont été minorées?
Alors, merci pour cette première question, Olivette. Il y a, pendant la période coloniale française, une grande méfiance liée à l'enseignement de la littérature. J'ai lu des témoignages qui indiquaient que, par exemple, les châtiments de Victor Hugo avaient été écartés de l'enseignement des instituteurs dans les années 20 parce que, eh bien, les châtiments, c'est un texte d'Hugo contre Napoléon III et un texte de révolte, ou un texte où on peut lire des raisons de se révolter contre un pouvoir arbitraire. Donc la relation à la littérature est assez ambiguë, parce que la littérature, elle peut être dangereuse, elle peut donner des idées et pousser les gens à prendre peut-être des positions radicales pour se révolter contre une oppression. Et petit à petit, des auteurs comme Léopold Sédar Senghor, comme Aimé Césaire, dans les années 30, eh bien, sont arrivés à écrire dans des revues des textes avec une force littéraire qu'ils associaient à une révolte contre une oppression. Et c'est ce lien avec la littérature est très fort, le lien entre la possibilité de voir le monde différemment et de contester un état d'oppression, eh bien, on peut la trouver dans la littérature. Et donc Senghor, Aimé Césaire ont écrit des textes magnifiques. Ils ont lancé ce mouvement de la négritude en France et dans les pays d'Afrique de l'Ouest, et aussi également aux Antilles, puisqu'il y avait Léon Gontran Damas qui venait de Guyane, qui ont participé à ce mouvement, et c'était un mouvement poétique. La poésie était vraiment dans une action, par sa beauté, une action de discussion, de révolte et de remise en cause d'un ordre du monde.
Très bien. Tu vois, tu me dis, dès que tu dis Senghor, la négritude, tout de suite, tu vois, c'est comme Pavlov, je suis obligée de te dire, mais alors les sœurs Nardal,
Ah.
Mais bon, les sœurs Nardal auraient inspiré Senghor, etc., et des étudiants africains entre les deux guerres. Mais je voudrais un petit peu revenir sur donc la littérature comme miroir social et culturel, la littérature comme lieu de résistance aussi, et peut-être aussi échappatoire, exutoire. Je voudrais en fait là parler un peu plus justement de ce magnifique roman que j'ai eu la chance de lire en tant que juge. Et je voudrais revenir sur la question de la voix. On parlait des voix minorées. La voix d'Alpha, le personnage principal, comment cette voix apparaît dans le roman. Mais comment tu as construit cette voix en fait?
Oui,
et
alors,
qui est Alpha?
Alors Alpha Ndiaye, c'est un tirailleur sénégalais qui, en fait, perd son plus que frère dès le début de la bataille et qui, voit une guerre, la Première Guerre mondiale, de son point de vue de jeune paysan africain qui arrive dans une guerre industrielle. Blaise Cendrars parle de guerre usinière à propos de la Première Guerre mondiale pour expliquer que, il pleuvait des bombes, il pleuvait des obus, comme il peut pleuvoir un jour de l'eau. Et ce que je voulais, et je tenais absolument à ce que ce tirailleur sénégalais ne parle pas dans une langue qu'on a appelée le petit nègre. C'est-à-dire que pendant la Première Guerre mondiale, l'armée française a édité un livre qui s'intitulait « Comment apprendre le français aux tirailleurs sénégalais ». Et c'était un français rudimentaire, avec vraiment une phrase tellement simple, avec moi, aimer manger, ou bien Yabon Banania, puisqu'il y a eu cette publicité autour du chocolat Banania qui était en petit nègre. Et moi, j'ai voulu déjouer ces préjugés en me proposant de construire un personnage dont on verrait toute la sensibilité et toutes les émotions mises en œuvre pendant ces moments de grande difficulté, pendant ces batailles qui ont été atroces. Et pour cela, j'ai cherché une solution. Il fallait que ce tirailleur sénégalais puisse parler et qu'on puisse entendre sa voix, et que cette voix, on sache bien que j'écrive en français, que c'était une voix qui pensait dans une langue étrangère. C'est-à-dire que j'ai souhaité que nous fassions, nous, lecteurs, et moi en premier, je suis peut-être le premier lecteur de mon personnage, que nous fassions irruption dans un flux de conscience. Quand on pense, on ne sait pas dans quelle langue on pense, on oublie dans quelle langue on pense. Et j'ai voulu que, bien que j'écrive en français, on reconnaisse derrière le français le Wolof, qui est une langue qui est parlée au Sénégal. Et donc, pour ce faire, j'ai travaillé le rythme du français. C'est-à-dire que j'ai travaillé les répétitions pour qu'on sache entendre derrière le français la langue Wolof, le rythme de la langue Wolof, parler dans des situations particulières en plus, c'est-à-dire une langue un peu sentencieuse. Et la langue française est une langue souple, donc elle m'a permis de travailler cela. Mais c'était, pour répondre à ta question, véritablement pour qu'on entende sa voix. Et que finalement, cette voix-là, eh bien, ce soit une voix originale. La grande difficulté quand on parle en tant qu'historien d'une période donnée, c'est et puis j'ai peur parce que
Oui,
tu es
oui,
historienne,
fais
mais
gaffe à ce que tu dis.
je vais te dire comment je vois les choses. C'est que souvent, l'histoire voit les choses en grand, c'est-à-dire par groupe. Et tout ce qui a été dit sur les tirailleurs sénégalais ne rentrait pas dans les détails de leurs émotions, de leur vie, de leur façon de voir le monde, de leur façon de voir le bien et le mal. Et la littérature, je pense, m'a permis cela. C'est-à-dire que j'ai souhaité que le texte puisse traduire ces émotions-là et peut-être déjouer des préjugés qui sont construits justement parce qu'on a une vision de masse, une vision large d'un groupe, alors que chacun des membres de ce groupe a une histoire particulière.
Oui, c'est vrai, c'est fabuleux, le côté musical en fait qu'on retrouve dans le roman, comme tu parles de répétition, c'est absolument magnifique. Alors je voudrais, on parle de voix minorée, et je me suis dit, bon voilà, c'est un roman qui se passe aussi dans un champ de bataille, c'est un monde essentiellement d'hommes, donc a priori les femmes sont quasiment inexistantes, mais en fait pour ceux qui ont pas lu le roman, mais je voulais savoir, tu arrives quand même à placer des femmes dans ce contexte, et je voulais savoir comment tu le fais, mais c'est très très particulier, elles ne sont pas au centre, mais il y a quelque chose qui se passe là. La question du genre là-dedans.
Oui, ce roman, je crois, a été écrit, enfin je l'ai écrit en me posant des contraintes. C'est-à-dire que mon tirailleur sénégalais, il est un peu particulier, il perd la raison sur le champ de bataille et il est recueilli par un médecin qui veut l'aider à sortir de son traumatisme. Mais il ne parle pas français. Donc le moyen que j'ai trouvé, c'était de lui faire dessiner des personnages. Et le premier personnage qu'il dessine, c'est sa mère. Donc en fait, ce personnage féminin est essentiel dans le roman parce que c'est un personnage qui est à la fois extrêmement présent, mais c'est un personnage qui a quitté le foyer, le domicile familial, qui a disparu en quelque sorte. Et pour moi, c'était important, justement, dans cette idée de construire un personnage original. C'est ce départ-là, cette coupure avec sa mère, qui fait de ce personnage un personnage qui arrive avec une fêlure avant d'entrer en guerre, avant d'entrer dans le combat. Et la guerre ne fait qu'agrandir cette fêlure, mais elle existe déjà auparavant. Et puis il y a un deuxième personnage féminin important, c'est une jeune femme qui est de la même classe d'âge que mon soldat, Alpha Ndiaye, et qui, malgré les pressions familiales, malgré le regard de la société sur elle, décide de se donner avant qu'il parte à la guerre, parce qu'elle devine que son corps et son cœur sera abîmé sur le champ de bataille. Et donc, malgré les interdits, eh bien, elle s'offre à lui pour sceller leur amour.
Très bien, très très intéressant. Écoute, on va un petit peu sortir de ce cadre-là pour parler plutôt de toi. De toi et du fait que tu as reçu ce prix absolument magnifique. Et j'aimerais bien savoir si ce prix t'a changé, a changé ta façon d'écrire, a changé aussi parce que tu es enseignant, donc ta façon d'enseigner, et puis qu'est-ce qui a pu changer? Est-ce que recevoir autant d'attention, apprendre d'autres, a changé ton processus d'écriture et d'enseignement?
Alors, je commence par la deuxième partie de ta question. J'ai eu l'impression, en tant que professeur de littérature, qu'après ce prix, les étudiants me prenaient un peu plus au sérieux quand je parlais. Ça, c'est une chose. Mais pour revenir à la première partie de cette question, à savoir si ça a changé ma façon d'écrire, je te dirais non. Parce que je suis un vieux jeune écrivain. J'ai appris à vivre avant d'écrire. Mais je peux dire aussi que j'écris pour apprendre à vivre. Les deux sont liés. J'ai de l'expérience du monde et je sais que l'essentiel pour moi, c'est de conserver une sorte de sincérité par rapport à ce que j'ai envie d'écrire, ce que je veux écrire. Et dans le fond, le fait d'être enseignant me permet d'être libre de ce point de vue-là. Je n'ai pas besoin d'écrire pour vivre. Et donc, ma profession d'enseignant enrichit mon travail d'écrivain. Et voilà, je ne pense pas avoir de pression particulière dans ce que j'ai envie d'écrire. J'ai horreur de m'ennuyer quand j'écris. Donc, je ne répète pas ce que j'ai fait ou j'essaie de trouver d'autres voies. Et c'est pour ça que je me permets de dire que je suis un vieux jeune écrivain. Je suis toujours en formation.
Ok, très bien. Ouais, très, très bien. Je voudrais qu'on parle aussi, parce que ce prix est aussi décerné aux traducteurs et ici aux traductrices, Anna. Et je m'intéressais beaucoup à la manière dont Anna et toi avez finalement travaillé à la traduction, parce que ce n'est pas nécessairement un travail solitaire. Vous étiez constamment, je sais, en relation. On veut savoir les dessous de l'affaire. Est-ce qu'il y a eu des tensions? Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? Allez, raconte.
Il n'y a pas eu de tension, Olivette. Ça s'est très bien passé. J'admire beaucoup Anna Moskovakis. Anna Moskovakis est une écrivaine, une poétesse américaine. Et elle m'a aidé à comprendre que l'acte de traduire, c'est un acte de création à part entière. Et ce qui est très intéressant, c'est qu'Anna m'a posé des questions sur l'horizon culturel, le contexte culturel dans lequel je plaçais mon personnage. Et j'ai senti chez elle une capacité d'écoute qui était assez extraordinaire. C'est-à-dire que elle a essayé de comprendre ce que pouvait signifier l'expression, par exemple, parenté à plaisanterie.
Ah oui, explique.
Alors, la parenté à plaisanterie, dans toute l'Afrique de l'Ouest, ça consiste pour deux familles, par exemple les Diop et les Ndiaye au Sénégal, à pouvoir plaisanter les uns avec les autres, même si on ne se connaît pas, sans que pour autant il y ait de ressentiment, sans qu'il y ait une volonté de se venger pour quoi que ce soit. C'est une parenté à plaisanterie qui peut exister aussi entre des ethnies. C'est une façon d'éviter la guerre, c'est-à-dire éviter la guerre par le rire, la prise de distance, l'ironie et la capacité à accepter d'être un peu moqué. Et donc j'ai expliqué ça à Anna Moskovakis et elle a essayé de trouver une solution pour traduire cette expression-là, parenté à plaisanterie, et j'ai trouvé que c'était très 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 bien.
Et est-ce qu'il y avait des moments aussi où il y avait pour toi le français n'arrive pas, il y a une limite finalement à la traduction? Je ne sais pas, si tu l'as lu en anglais, est-ce que tu te dis, bon, là, ça exprime pas parce que Anna ne sait pas traduire, mais simplement parce qu'il y a une limite à la langue qui n'est pas reflétée dans l'autre langue?
Je vais te faire une confidence en public.
Vas-y.
Je parle un anglais d'aéroport.
Okay.
Donc, j'étais incapable de juger, si tu veux, de la qualité de certaines traductions. Mais j'ai des gens autour de moi et qui sont, par exemple, Philip Sands, que j'admire beaucoup, qui écrit des livres passionnants, qui s'émerveillait sur certaines traductions, parce qu'il a lu le texte en français, en anglais, et qui a félicité Anna Moskovakis. On a eu un échange à trois à un moment donné, et j'ai senti vraiment chez lui une grande admiration pour la façon dont elle a réussi à traduire des choses qui pourraient être en effet extrêmement difficiles à passer d'une langue à l'autre.
Oui, des lauriers de la part de Philippe, je pense que c'est très très fort, parce que c'est assez difficile en fait, en général. Et je voulais aussi te demander si tu pensais dans le futur retravailler avec Anna. Je voudrais préciser que le livre de David a été traduit, je pense, dans plus de 38 langues. Oui. Donc évidemment, on ne s'attend pas à ce que tu lises toutes les traductions, mais est-ce qu'il y a des gens avec qui tu as envie de retravailler dans d'autres langues comme ça? Oui,
alors avec Anna Moskovakis, évidemment, j'ai très envie de retravailler, mais elle a des contraintes. C'est-à-dire que parfois, on n'arrive pas à avoir la même traductrice ou le même traducteur. Et c'est moi, en tout cas, de mon côté, je suis très enthousiaste à l'idée de lui proposer la traduction de mon prochain roman.
Oui.
Mais ce sont des affaires d'éditeurs, et les affaires d'éditeurs sont parfois un peu mystérieuses.
Un peu compliqué, effectivement. Tu sais, on parlait aussi un petit peu du monde de la traduction et peut-être du coup de pouce qui devrait être donné aux traducteurs. Tu veux en parler?
Oui, je connais le président d'une association de traducteurs qui est mon traducteur en allemand, qui s'appelle Andreas Jandl, et qui m'a demandé si je pouvais écrire il y a quelques années, un texte visant à condamner l'usage de l'IA pour les traductions littéraires. Et j'ai signé tout de suite. Et d'ailleurs, j'ai demandé à mon agente littéraire d'exiger que dans tous mes contrats, il soit stipulé qu'il ne soit pas possible que la traduction soit faite par une IA. Et pourquoi? Parce que je pense qu'il y a quelque chose d'infiniment humain dans la traduction. Je pense que les traducteurs, en fait, c'est eux finalement, je crois, les garants de l'universel actuellement. C'est eux qui peuvent transmettre le devoir-être fraternel qui doit être le nôtre, avec une sensibilité qui est aiguisée par le fait qu'ils passent d'un horizon culturel à un autre, avec grande facilité. Et ça, pour moi, c'est assez extraordinaire. Et je voudrais vraiment encourager et aider les traducteurs à continuer à vivre, les traducteurs littéraires, à continuer à vivre de leur travail. Parce qu'on a besoin vraiment d'eux pour diffuser une littérature de qualité.
Eh bien, sur ces bons mots, je vous remercie. David signera les livres tout à l'heure. Merci à tous. Bonne soirée.
Thank you, David and Olivette. Infinitely human. That was a very beautiful way of describing translation. Now, I'd like to take you even further behind the scenes and introduce you to two very influential people. The literary agent Laurence Laluyaux and the publisher Jacques Testard. We didn't quite realize how many French people we were bringing on here, but I won't apologize. Laurence is she's the director at Rogers, Coleridge and White. She represents authors including Han Kang, Laszlo Krasznahorkai, Olga Tokarczuk, Valeria Luiselli, Alia Trebugo-Serran and Olga Rahn, all of whom have won or been nominated for Booker Prizes. Laurence herself has just won the Otele Award for the promotion of international literature, and Laszlo Krasznahorkai describes her as an angel. Jacques is the founder and publisher of Fitzcarraldo Editions, where he has edited and published authors including Svetlana Alexievich, Annie Ernaux, Jon Fosse, Vincenzo Latronico, Fernanda Melchor, Adania Shibli, and Olga Tokarczuk. Fitzcarraldo books have been nominated for the International Booker Prize 17 times, more than books by any other publisher. Between them, and I'm just going to phrase it like this, Jacques and Laurence have won 6 Nobel Prizes. And one of those is an author they share. We've given this part of the evening a slightly tongue-in-cheek title, How to Win the Nobel Prize. I don't know that they're going to give us specific directions, but you never know. Let's see. Please welcome to the stage Jacques Testard and Laurence Laluyaux. I forgot to say I'm slipping into this seat for this bit. We work so closely with agents and publishers, actually it's nice to give you a little prompt from here. Jacques, can you tell us to start with, you've told this story many times, why you founded Fitzcarraldo and where you saw the need?
I founded Fitzcarraldo because I needed a job. I'd recently been sacked from my job as a commissioning editor at a small press called Notting Hill Editions, and a family member offered me a loan to start a very small press, and I really didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't have any other job prospects lined up, but I needed to pay rent in Southeast London, and so I decided to take the loan and to give it a go. So to begin with, it was really a tiny press, just me working on my own full-time, publishing 6 books a year, 3 novels, 3 works of non-fiction, 3 works of fiction, 3 works of non-fiction, and a list that was split between translation and English language. And that was the model for Fitzcarraldo at the beginning, to publish ambitious, innovative, contemporary literature. What I realized after 5 or 6 years of doing Fitzcarraldo is that there was indeed this gap in the market that I was in no way aware of when I started. And that gap, or this kind of blind spot, was unique to, I think, the Anglophone world, where we tend to publish, or historically publishers here mainly publish in the English language. There's this figure of 3% translations in America and in the UK, which I think was true until quite recently. And so innocently, naively, I got to acquire rights to the books by incredible writers such as Svetlana Alexievich and Olga Tokarczuk, who are all published by fantastic publishers all over Europe, but happen to not have publishers in English.
And why was that, do you think?
How long do we have?
We've got 20 minutes. We can.
I think there is maybe an element of it is the legacy of imperialism, honestly.
Oh, hang on, we're coming to that later.
Okay, right.
That is going to be most of the 20 minutes. Laurence, how did you see it? I mean, what were you doing around this time, and were you seeing the same thing as Jacques discovered?
Well, I was, when I arrived in England, I worked in a bookshop quite a couple of years after I first came to England, and it was an indie bookshop. It was a really good bookshop, but I was constantly puzzled, a bit bewildered by the international books, the books that were being translated, and didn't quite understand why some were translated and some were not translated. And from that job, I went on to work for a literary agency where I worked selling foreign rights, so selling translation rights, and mostly English language, at the time exclusively English language authors. And what I noticed was that because of the English language, there was a somewhat unfair advantage that we would have access to so many different kinds of publishers from so many different countries. And I thought, how about turning the tables? How about using this and maybe introducing, at the time it was Brazilian authors and then one Mexican writer, who's Valeria Luiselli, and thinking maybe I can use this unfair advantage to say, well, how about this Brazilian writer? So that's really how instinctively it felt like the right way into it, into opening a few doors.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember when we spoke earlier, we were talking about translated literature being, you know, a tiny shelf or a tiny section of the bookshop, which maybe that's changed a little bit now.
That's the main thing, really, that translated literature is not a genre in most of the countries in the world, and it's breaking it away from that. And also that it's not just one thing, you know, it can be funny, it doesn't have to be intimidating. So I think at the time it was perceived as an intimidating proposition.
Yeah, a genre in itself. So you two came together, I mean, apart from, there may be many ways, but in particular, you both worked with Olga Tokarczuk. Can you tell that story?
Sure. So I came to publish Olga Tokarczuk a little bit after Brexit. So when Brexit happened, the referendum, I was as shocked as many other people. Also, at that point, I was only a French national, and it felt like I was being, personally rejected by Britain somehow. Anyway, in my job as a publisher, the reaction to Brexit, and I was still editing a magazine called The White Review at the time with my friend Ben Eastham, we talked a lot about what the responsibility of a publisher or a magazine editor is at a time of social or political difficulty, and we talked about maybe doing a Brexit issue of The White Review or an anthology of writing about the importance of Europe for Fitzcarraldo in the essay series. And ultimately the conclusion was, let's not do something that is out of our comfort zone. What we need to do, what we need to be doing is to do what we already do well and do it as best as possible. And in my case, it was translated literature. And I decided it was important to try and find a Polish writer to publish, because Poland and Polish migrants to this country in particular had become such a talking point and, I guess, scapegoats for the so-called immigration problems in this country. And at that point, I remembered that I had in my inbox roughly 200 pages from a novel called Flights, translated by Jennifer Croft, that she'd sent me maybe 10 or 11 months earlier that I hadn't got around to reading. And I read those pages appropriately enough on a plane back from Spain, found the book extraordinary, and then made a deal to publish that book and the books of Jacob. And then quite soon after that, it was a very short timeline from the point where I acquired Flights to publication. And then a year later, she won the Booker, and I think it was in the run-up to the Booker win, maybe early 2017, where Olga needed an agent, and I put them in touch.
Introduced us, yes. So I came to meet Olga, who wanted to meet me in person, didn't want to sign with an agent. She couldn't have a chat and a cigarette with, she said. So I went to the office, and then she said, "You and me go downstairs on the pavement." So we went downstairs, and I've given up smoking, but she had a cigarette. We had a chat.
She didn't condemn you for having given up. No, that was okay.
No, that was okay. But that's how we met. And I had read her because she is in French. She had been in many languages. But somehow I'd read one of the early books, and I hadn't read her for a long time. And I think one thing that is so crucial, and that Jacques did so well, is finding the point of entry. Because still to this day, I think if the order of the three books that Fitzcarraldo acquired had been different, it might have been harder, but somehow to go from Flights to Drive Your Plough to Books of Jacob was just a perfect journey through all the different ways, you can enjoy her writing, but also accessible and really compulsive.
Yeah, these are three very different books. Do you want to say, either of you, a little bit about them? And they've also got two different translators, right?
So Flights is what Olga would call a constellation novel. So a novel made up of lots of different stories that are maybe linked thematically and with kind of echoes and I guess through lines through the stories, and it kind of builds up into a greater whole. And the constellation novel is something she's been doing for her whole career, really. Then Drive Your Plough Over the Bones of the Dead is her subversive take on the thriller or the noir novel, and it's an incredibly propulsive and fun book to read that I think will appeal to readers of thrillers, but also to more literary readers, because it's full of references, notably to William Blake. And then Books of Jacob is a 1,000-page epic about a kind of religious mystic figure called Jacob Frank, who lived in the late 18th century and led this sect. So it's a book about the Enlightenment and religion and identity and history and the stories that we invent about our identities and nationalities.
So you planned to publish them in that order, or do you had them in that order?
So it was obvious that we would do Flights first of all, and that was Jennifer Croft, who had been working on that book for a long time, and half of the book was already translated at the point when I acquired it. And then Jennifer was already working on Books of Jacob, but because it's a very long and complex book, she needed some time to get that done. And so initially those two were the ones I acquired, and when Olga came to London to promote Flights, we had a beer and a cigarette with Antonia Lloyd-Jones, who's Olga's other translator, and with Jennifer Croft. And it was apparent at that point that Jenny would need more time to finish Books of Jacob. And Antonia said, "Well, why don't we do Drive Your Plough in between? I think it's a really good next book to do." And then the circumstances in which the books came out, the the timing could not have been more ideal. From flights coming out a month after Poland was the guest of honor at London Book Fair, and Olga happened to be author of the day, which is not something I knew at the point where I acquired the book, to then winning the International Booker a year later. 6 months after the Booker, we were publishing Drive Your Plough, and a year after that, she was awarded the Nobel Prize. So there was this incredible momentum that was not something we could possibly have predicted or hoped for. And I know that Laurence also experienced the momentum in terms of the translations and what happened for Olga internationally.
Yeah, so that was very much a case of hitting the ground running and being around the time of the Booker. And what is often the case, but particularly with Olga, it was a little bit kind of archaeology. It was a lot of looking back, and often what you find with these writers who are so exceptional is that they're either in print in some countries or they have at some point been published by very, very good publishers. And the translations are often quite good. And so I was digging around immediately and finding these old Catalan translations and Chinese translations and putting it all together. And it's true that the Booker Prize is so respected, but also so exciting for international audiences. There's no literary prize like this, certainly in Western Europe. There's a sense that some of it is very practical. It's the fact that most prizes in Europe have judges who are there for life. So the fact that the jury changes every year, often there can be quite young members of the jury, young writers are selected, and it really, flights winning the Booker was a sort of something catching fire and helped. Not just finding new languages and finding publishers in new countries, but also reviving. I mentioned Catalan because there was a Catalan translator who had translated Olga 30 years ago and who had been trying to get someone to take the translation and had not got anyone interested. And so we found her and she revised the translation and we brought that back in print. And so there's all of this. I should also say in the mix, there were the English language translators who are extraordinary, but also translators in other countries who'd worked on every single book, including, crucially, the Swedish translator who had translated absolutely everything. And Olga has a community of translators who she invites to Poland, and there may be 30 of them. I went once when they were there talking about the Empusium with her for 3-4 hours. How would you translate this? How will you do it in your language? So
amazing.
There's a community of publishers, but there's also a community of translators.
And the answer to the question how to win the Nobel Prize is you have to be published in Swedish.
Swedish, damn it. I was just going to ask, was it because of winning the International Booker Prize? No, it was because she was published in Swedish.
But that boosted the Swedish, I should say, the Swedish publisher was one man, and she did say when I first met her, I have a Swedish publisher, he's one man, he lives in the middle of nowhere in a sort of cabin, and I will never leave him. And I thought, so the Booker helped him.
Good, yeah, thank you. I think we might have time to talk about the latent imperialism of the Anglophone world. Have you got 5 minutes?
Where do we start? So I think the reason why there still is less translation in the English language than there is in, say, other Western countries, European countries, is because there is this feeling in America and in the UK, partly as a result of the empire and the Commonwealth, that what English writers, American writers have to say is enough. There's no need to kind of go beyond the borders of the English language. And this is something that I think I realized, over a few years of working in publishing, this kind of narrow-mindedness and this ghettoization of translated literature as a genre, that is definitely changing. I think the International Booker Prize has been instrumental in this change. And I mean, the fact that you can get 700 people out on a Friday night to listen to an agent and a publisher talk about it is testament to this.
They've come for Dua Lipa, Jack. They're not here for you. Keep going.
Well, I think that there's another reason why the International Booker has become so prominent internationally, and I think it's because of the power of the English language, which again is a legacy of imperialism. When a book is translated into English, that's when it becomes accessible to publishers the world over who will be able to read, a Bulgarian novel in English, and to consider publishing it in their language. And so the International Booker becomes this shop window. And I think I realized, again, quite late, it was maybe when I was in Palestine for PALFest a few years ago, the power that I have, even as a small independent publisher, to decide to publish an author from a lesser translated language or country.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, for better or for worse, English then leads to others. Laurence, you were saying earlier about, scouts take the day off at the long list just to see whether they can get this into other people's hands, right?
Yes, I think there's a sense very much that literary scouts who are really instrumental to this process, who read and try to follow what's happening in a lot of different cultures and in the literature in a lot of countries. And the Booker, the International Booker, certainly being on the long list, is perceived as something that everybody dreams of it. And you mentioned Bulgaria. I mean, there's been a Bulgarian, winner, but also I know this year there's a Bulgarian author on the shortlist, and I represent a Bulgarian author whose novel's not out yet. But the sense of joy that it wasn't just a one-off, that it may be, talking of opening doors, the fact that Georgi Gospodinov won meant that there's a sense that maybe these literatures, particularly, in Europe from the East, finally we might be able to be read. And I think that's what international publishers get from the Booker long list. It's completely impossible to predict who's going to be on it, really, and which languages will be represented.
Yeah, that's a great thing, that it shines a spotlight on a particular language or part of the world, it's true. Also, I want to come back to Han Kang, who is the first winner of this prize and who you now represent, but didn't at the time. Also, can I just say, I really like the fact that you have gone to Stockholm so often that people think of you as a sort of travel agent for the Nobel Prize. People always ask Laurence, what's the weather like? What boots shall I pack? So tell us about Kang and how you came to her.
So Kang, I met through her translator, Deborah Smith, who let me know that Kang wanted a change and introduced us. And she was in Paris for a few days. So I went and spent a day with her. And Kang is a very particular, quite unique case in the sense that she had been translated, but not that much, before The Vegetarian won the International Booker. And it really is the translation and the fact that Max Porter, who you all know of as an author, but who was a publisher at the time, took the time to listen to this very young translator who was going around the London Book Fair with a sample of this book called The Vegetarian. And that's how this book was published in English. And so a lot of what happened then was a lot of very quick translations, quite a lot of them from the English in order to be quick. And so the work that we've done over the last nearly, I think, 10 years now, has also been to go back and find the readers and find the translators who, in some cases, have just learned Korean in order to be able to read Korean authors. And in her case, for instance, she has a wonderful publisher in Georgia who spent 6 years wanting to buy The Vegetarian, but said, I will not buy it until I find a translator, and found a translator 5 months before she won the Nobel and had bought the book.
Amazing.
was deliriously happy. But with the languages that are particularly, they're not difficult, but they are difficult. But it's hard to find translators. The pace is different. So for someone like Kang, it's also going back into the unpublished books and bringing them so that there's a full body of work over a period of maybe several years, because in some countries there's maybe just one translator who can translate from Korean.
But you're both doing that, aren't you? Bodies of work, really having faith in writers and bringing them to the fore. It's, amazing project. Right, well, without wishing to sound like a therapist, our time is up. So I am going to thank you very much and move over there. Okay, we're moving on to something slightly different now. To celebrate the 10th anniversary of the International Booker Prize, we asked 10 creators in 10 different countries to spend a day with one of the winning books and to film that for us. You can see those clips playing now. And we had a public poll inviting readers to vote for their favourite International Booker Prize winner of the past 10 years. Appropriate enough, the winner of that poll was the very first winner of the prize, The Vegetarian, by Han Kang, and as you've just heard, it was translated by Deborah Smith, who, by the way, did learn Korean very, very shortly before, and it was sort of miraculous. I don't know if you saw her when you came in crying when she won. As those of you who've read the book know, it's a beautifully strange, dark novel about a woman who takes a stand against brutality by refusing to eat meat. We actually struggled to find an extract to read tonight that worked in isolation. The book is so perfect. But we've chosen a brief reading from the last section of the book in which the protagonist, Yong-hye, receives a visit in hospital from her sister, In-hye. Yong-hye is refusing all food and longing to become a plant. Here to read it to you is an actor you will recognise from Bridgerton and Sex Education. She's been named one of Forbes' 30 under 30 and been on the Time 100 Next list. She is fresh from The Devil Wears Prada 2. Please welcome Simone Ashley.
When she came upon the unexpected sight of a female patient doing a handstand at the far end of the western corridor, it never even crossed her mind that it might be Yong-hye. Only when the nurse, with whom she'd just spoken on the telephone, guided her in that direction, had she been able to recognize Yong-hye's long, thick hair. Her sister was upside down and balancing on her hands, her face flushed, almost puce. She's been at it for 30 minutes already, the nurse said, seeming impatient. It started 2 days ago, before he went back to the nurse's room, the nurse said. Well, she'll fall over if you give her a little nudge. Give it a try, and if you can't get her to talk to you, well, we would have had to push her over to get her back in the ward anyway. Left alone with Yong-hye, In-hye squatted down and tried to look her sister in the eye. Anyone's face would look different when they're upside down. Yong-hye's face certainly looked odd, with what little flesh she had on her cheeks pushed down towards her eyes. Those eyes, glittering and sharp as Yong-hye stared into space. She seemed unaware of her sister's presence. Yong-hye. No reply. Yong-hye, what are you doing? Stand up. She reached out a hand to Yong-hye's flushed cheek. Stand up, Yong-hye. Doesn't your head hurt? Oh, for goodness sake, your face is bright red. With nothing else for it, she gave her sister a gentle push, just as the nurse said. Yong-hye immediately tumbled to the floor, and In-hye quickly lifted her head up, supporting her head as you would a baby. Sister. Yong-hye's face was wreathed in smiles, her eyes shining as though she'd just woken up from a happy dream. When did you get here? What on earth were you doing just now, she asked. Yong-hye met her question with another. Sister, did you know? Know what? I didn't, you see. I thought trees stood up straight. I only found out just now. They actually stand with both arms in the earth, all of them. Look over there. Aren't you surprised? Yonghae sprang up and pointed to the window. All of them, they're all standing on their heads. Yonghae laughed frantically. Inghae remembered moments from their childhood when Yonghae's face had worn the same expression as it did now. Those moments when her sister's single-lidded eyes would narrow and turn completely dark, when that innocent laughter would come rushing out of her mouth. Do you know how I found out? Well, I was in a dream, and I was standing on my head. Leaves were growing from my body and roots were sprouting from my hands. So I dug down into the earth, on and on. I wanted flowers to bloom from my crotch, so I spread my legs. I spread them wide. Bewildered, Inghae looked across at Yonghae's feverish eyes. I need to water my body. I don't need this kind of food, sister. I need water.
Beautiful. Thank you, Simone. Which brings us to this year. The winner of the International Booker Prize 2026 will be announced on the 19th of May. Some of you may have seen our 6 short films made by our brilliant content team and shown on social media. They were directed by Holly Blakey. As I said earlier, they were filmed here at the South Bank. They feature incredible actors. And while I'm here, I might as well tell you that last year's shortlist films have just received 2 major awards. So, thank you. We'll pass that on. So we want to show you some clips, just short clips from this year's films. Let's have a look.
Well then, great, said Bob. Terrific meeting. Let's go ahead. Jake clapped his hands. His enthusiasm seemed irrepressible. His whole body trembled with it. Terrific meeting. Just the best. No, said Pabst. They both looked at him, not indignantly, but uncomprehendingly, as if something inexplicable had occurred before their eyes, a wonder of nature, a mystery such as the world had never seen.
I swear to the ruler of the Albanian Alps, Lake Tukajini, that to my dying day, I shall not touch a man. I shall not touch a man, and I shall preserve my virginal innocence, renouncing for all times the woman in me, renouncing forever the woman in me.
Hunting men is a little more painstaking than hunting wild animals. The fragility of the human body means they don't get very far.
Although the darkness of night is softened by the full moon, Melquiades has an even greater advantage in night hunting, because he's colorblind, just like wild boars. His night vision is exceptional, and his range of sight far better than other men's.
People should eat at the same table, only if they're of equal rank.
This is why I can eat with my fiancé, and can eat at a large banquet where there are people of all ranks, but cannot eat one-on-one with you.
Perhaps not with Aoyama-sensei, the mainlander writer. But what about with Aoyama Chizuko, the human being?
Sweets and kisses in the streets. And you didn't even notice the transition. 1 minute, we were sitting side by side and silent at home. The next, we were part of the roiling, bellowing crowd, part of the movement, part of the struggle. Surab's voice and mine flung the slogans into the cold winter sky. Our smoky voices, no longer the voices of children.
In another time, they would have felt slightly ashamed.
But practical, serene, resolute, intensely relaxed, grasping, asking a great deal of life with the most perfect innocence.
They had next to no modesty or discretion, were rarely embarrassed by anything. In that, those clever little barbarians, my daughters amazed me.
Place your bets. You can buy this year's shortlisted books in the foyer, as well as all 10 past winners of the prize and the books by this evening's speakers. They'll be signing them there, so please do join them. I'm going to invite them back to the stage now, while thanking you all very much for coming. Thank you.